What's going on, guys? Welcome back to WWE Network and Show, where I, Graham G.S. Matthews, break down all the original content you watch on the WWE Network, on Peacock, and on Vice. As today we're talking Season 4, Episode 8 of Dark Side of the Ring, Bam Bigelow, the Beast from the East. Another dead wrestler episode, and this was quite an enjoyable one. I honestly did not know a lot about Bam Bigelow, beyond what I've seen from him in, as stupid as this sounds, from the WWE video games, and they don't really talk about the legacy of Bam Bigelow in documentaries and stuff like that. You don't really see a lot of archived content of Bigelow in WWE beyond the Lawrence Taylor WrestleMania main event. I haven't seen a lot of his work. I've seen every WWE pay-per-view on the network, so I've seen his stuff there. But from ECW, WCW, I didn't really see a lot of that stuff. So I really did not know a lot about Bigelow coming into this episode, and I really enjoyed it. Now, as is the case with every episode, a lot of the stories are subject to, reality, if that makes sense. A lot of these stories might be altered for the show. They might have got them wrong. That was certainly the case with Tales from the Territories, which I wouldn't know until after I was done recording these reviews, because I'm not that big of a wrestling history buff when it comes to, the people that they focus these episodes on. But for the most part, it seemed like they got it right, and I really enjoyed the episode. A lot better than last week's Abdullah the Butcher episode. So they open up the episode of his ex-wife Dana talking about the birth of their daughter Richie. And Richie says that he was such a great father and that she looked up to him as a father and whatnot. And she recalls the last time she ever saw him. And then he was nodding off while he was driving, while she was in the passenger seat while he was driving. And he ended up pulling into a diner. And she was really worried they might get into an accident. And the next thing she knows, she was getting pulled out of the car by police. He was being arrested, and her mom came to take her away and basically told her that might be the last time you see her father for a while, and she never ended up seeing him again after that. So he got arrested. So I thought that was interesting, because typically these episodes always start, which makes sense, with where they were born, how they grew up, which is what they immediately went into after this. But they kind of started with a little bit of a story, oh shit, this is kind of what his life came to before, everything kind of went down the shitter from there, and his life went downhill and whatnot. So I thought that was interesting, the way they structured that beginning of the episode. But anyway, Dana says that they started out as friends, her and Scott, Bam Bigelow, that's his real name, Scott. And neither of them went to college. They grew up in Asbury Park, New Jersey. DDP, Diamond Dallas Page, who's on this episode as a talking head, actually knew him from the Jersey Shore. And they would do shots at the club together, and Bam at that point was probably 17, but no one gave a shit. They would still party anyway. He was called the Beast from the East even back then, DDP says. He played football, he did high school wrestling. We hear from not only the daughter Richie, but also the sons, one of them named Shane, and he recalls some wrestling stories, not pro wrestling stories, but some stories of his father wrestling in high school and whatnot, and kind of some of the stories that surrounded his reputation, including jumping off of billboards on top of fucking mattresses with his brothers. DDP heard that he bit someone's ear off one time. Taz says that he believes all the stories. Taz was another talking head on the episode. The other son, Scott, Scott Jr., recalls him being a bounty hunter for a time, and the partner got killed, leading to Bam spending 6 months in a Mexican prison. And he used to run through the cell walls. I guess that's what they said. He would always try to escape, and they would stop him every time. He ended up befriending the judge and working as a pseudo bodyguard for him, and that allowed him, because people, I guess, would jump the barricade. I forget the exact word they used, but the people that were on trial would jump over whatever and go after the judge. So as protection, the judge hired Bam to kind of help him out, and as a reward, he let him out a little bit early. I guess he saved kids from a burning house. There were a lot of crazy stories that surrounded Bam apparently, that I had no idea about. Again, who knows if these are all true? I doubt it, but that's a lot of crazy shit. And if even half of them are true, that's still pretty impressive. He went to wrestling school after he got out of jail, because there really wasn't a lot he could do with a record. So he went to wrestling school. He trained under Larry Sharp at the Monster Factory, which they actually just did a whole documentary about, which I've yet to watch in full, by the way. But with Danny Cage and the crew over on Apple TV, it's still there, Apple Plus TV. I hear it's a great show. I spoke to Danny about it earlier this year, but cheap plug, but just check it out. My interview with him is actually up from a couple of months ago. Anyway, so the Bam name apparently was inspired by Bam from the Flintstones, which I did not know. He got the flame tattoo on his head, which really sent the message, hey, I'm a tough motherfucker. He was a really tough guy. Paul Heyman was doing wrestling magazines at that time, and he would promote Bigelow in the magazine. He promoted him before he even had a fucking match. And that's how Dave Meltzer, who was also another talking head on this episode, came to know who Bam was. The guy was 370 pounds, doing shit off the top rope, super impressive. He ended up signing with WWF almost immediately in 1987, married Dana soon after, or around that same time. Maybe just proposed to her, but they got married around that time. And they kind of made him into the next big thing. He would team with Hogan, learn from Hogan, and Dana says that he remained humble at home. But others were bound to be jealous because they had been in the business for like 10, 11 years. He had just been wrestling for like 2 years, had very little experience. He was still very much immature. And that kind of cost him in the end. The officials have ended up souring on him. Andre, they recall, kind of roughing up during a matchup to kind of show that he had to pay his dues. And after officials soured on him, that kind of led to his departure from the company in, 88. I think he was gone pretty quickly. So he ended up working in Japan, which is something he always wanted to do. And then in 92, he worked out a deal with Vince to return. He came back to the company. And then he was doing stuff from 92 to 95, culminating in him wrestling the NFL star Lawrence Taylor, football star Lawrence Taylor, in the main event of WrestleMania 11. Business was down, so this was Vince's idea of kind of like putting together a big marquee money match that all the sports media, football media would pay attention to and kind of give Bigelow the rub and get him to where they wanted him to be as like a top main event performer again. So he really benefited from that, and Bigelow carried Taylor throughout the match. And even the Sons talk about that people online, myself probably included, will call it one of the worst WrestleManias and one of the worst WrestleMania main events of all time. But they also credit their father in saying that no one else could have carried Taylor through that match but him. And Bigelow, being a former football player himself, looked up to Lawrence Taylor, so it must have been a really cool nod for him to be able to work with him and whatnot, which is pretty sick. That was like a sense of pride, blah, 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 to be able to wrestle Lawrence Taylor in the main event of WrestleMania. He not only got to wrestle in WWE, but fucking main event WrestleMania. If the guy accomplished nothing else, and I'm not even sure Bigelow won any championships in WWE, at least he has that on his record, which is why I'm still surprised that he's not in the WWE Hall of Fame. I know there was talk of that a couple of years ago. I'm surprised it hasn't happened already. Kind of egregious that it hasn't, but whatever. Not only for what he did in WWE, but just the career that he had, and just, I don't know, it just doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Like the other stuff that he accomplished in WCW, ECW, other promotions, what he meant for that time period and being one of the first real agile big men. But anyway, soon after, so they kind of talk about like the WrestleMania match, like I said, and Vince trusted him to pull it off. He got a big paycheck out of it, and that kind of worked out. He had a lot of wear and tear on his body, though, because being a big, agile man, he was doing stuff that he probably shouldn't have been doing, and he was wearing out his body a lot quicker as a result. So Dana, being young at the time, didn't really think of the long-term effects this stuff was having on her husband's body. He had prescribed pills, and he got addicted. Surprise, surprise. Ended up going to ECW. I guess he worked out an early departure from his WWE contract. I found that through the Wikipedia page. I guess he just wasn't fond of the creative influence that the Clique had on the company at the time, so he left in 95, 96, I think. But he went to ECW. Taz recalls him like beating some fucking guy backstage. Because I guess they hit a kid or something. I missed part of the story, but I guess Bigelow brought someone backstage, one of the other wrestlers, who had hit a kid during the show, and he really taught him a lesson by beating the fuck out of him, like backstage or whatever. So again, I don't really know what that was about. But they just basically say the Sons do and everyone else that ECW at that point was just complete chaos. Taz recalls Bigelow putting him through the ring right before he beat him for the championship. And it was a really cool behind-the-scenes story, and Taz even says, I feel dirty even talking about it and pulling back the curtain, because he does it a lot here, and he's a very old-school kayfabe guy usually. But I thought the behind-the-scenes kind of look at that spot, which is one of the most memorable spots, I would think, in WWE, or just wrestling history, not WWE, this is ECW, but in wrestling history, just a really cool fucking spot. And it kind of takes us through the entire thing, because he was worried that he wouldn't be able to clear it, and that his head might hit like one of the main frames of the ring that they kind of used to set it up and whatnot, because they kind of opened a trap door for them to go through. Really intriguing, cool stuff of him talking about it here. And Bigelow, first of all, they cleared it, and they kind of took us through exactly how it happened. And as soon as they went through and heard the pop, the first thing Bigelow said to Taz was, "Are you okay?" And Taz was like, "That's Bam Bam Bigelow." And there was a big pop when Bigelow, when the crowd kind of died down a little bit, that was when he climbed out of the hole. He pinned Taz and got another big reaction to win the championship. And Taz said that he hid the hurting that he had very well. He wasn't really showing that he was hurting. Dana recalls him being angry and incoherent, and that wasn't really the person that he was, but the pills made him that guy. He would get prescribed like massive bottles of pills, and the Sons were saying that they had never seen bigger bottles of pills in their entire lives. Dana said that she called the doctor and told him, stop prescribing this crap to my husband because you're just damaging our family or damaging him. You're going to kill the guy. Like, please stop. And specifically, the doctor was prescribing Bam Bam OxyContin, which there was a massive surge of, I guess, at that point in like the early 2000s, late 90s, whatever year it might have been. And I think always wanting a daughter kind of helped him out a little bit and kind of weaning off that stuff, if only for a little while. And he got to be a dad, and the sons and Richie, the daughter, talk about how great of a dad he was to them for the most part. And he continued to make money by wrestling, and there was no pension in wrestling, so he would still wrestle. He would still wrestle and make money, and I guess he called himself to the sons the biggest loser wrestler because he would lose a lot, but he would still make a lot of money off of it, so it didn't really matter to him. DDP, knowing Bam Bam from their time growing up before Bam Bam even got in the business, he actually was the one that brought Bam Bam into WCW at a certain point in like 2000 or whatever. But he started no-showing shows, and WCW basically told Dana, like, listen, we got to pay him to sit out the rest of his contract because he's not showing up for fucking shows. Wikipedia said that his departure was something different, though. He was still there, apparently, when WWF bought WCW, and he just opted to not get one of the buyout contracts. So I'm not really sure what to believe, but that's what the wife said here. Anyway, so Richie recalls writing about the last time that she saw her father, that she alluded to at the beginning of the episode. She told that story already. She wrote about in 8th grade, and she reread that letter that she wrote in 8th grade, like the night before this was filmed. And she gets really emotional talking about that. Dana told him, like, listen, you need to get help. And if you don't, you got to get gone. Like, you got to get out of here. So he preferred the pills over his family. That's how bad it got. That's how bad the addiction got. So they got a divorce. And Richie would recall times where he would call her on the phone, would call his daughter on the phone, and it would just be like long, like bouts of silence, like just long periods of silence because he would be crying and really even couldn't get out the word hi because he was just so upset with himself, and that was the place in his life that he was in at that point. The son wanted to see him, and I guess he was old enough to where he could fly down for spring break. I guess he might have been living in Florida at the time. I assume the mom and the rest of the family was still in New Jersey, I would have to imagine. I'm not sure where they were living exactly at the time. The son wanted to go visit him back in Florida, and he called him, and he didn't pick up, and the girlfriend said that he wasn't home, and he was bummed that he didn't get to see him. And Bam Bam ended up calling him soon after and said, hey, sorry, I missed you, blah, blah, blah. And the son was really pissed, kind of told him how he felt, and kind of got it off his chest, like, hey, you've been dodging us, blah, 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 blah. And before they can even really reconcile, he died. So they talk about finding out how he died, when he died in January of 2007. Dana said it was due to an accidental overdose, and they all recall when they kind of found out. DDP gets emotional, kind of reliving that moment when he found out that he passed away. Shane Douglas, who was also a talking head on the episode, says that he wishes that he asked for help, that Bam Bam asked for help. He wishes that could have happened. And they talk kind of like post-death and how it could have been avoided, the final few years of his life, and the drugs and the toll that it took on his body and his well-being and whatnot, and as well as his legacy in the ring and the wrestling business and being one of the first agile big men, the impact that he had on the business, and what he will be remembered for and whatnot. And they intersplice kind of clips of I would assume a shoot interview he did at a certain point, probably in the late 90s, early 2000s. You don't see it, but you do hear it, which is cool. So you kind of hear from Bam Bam a little bit. They did that in another episode, maybe the Adrian Adonis one? Not the Abdullah one, because Abdullah was on the episode last week, but it was one episode they had done. Maybe it was the Graham family episode a couple of weeks ago. Maybe it was that one where they interspliced like quotes of Graham on a podcast or a shoot interview or whatever. And, you know, he's obviously since passed. But anyway, as far as this episode goes, really, really good stuff. Again, I'm not sure how much of this to believe because it seemed like certain stuff was exaggerated or just not true. But if it is true, or at least most of it is true, even still, this was a very strong episode. I personally did not know a lot about Bam Bam Bigelow. He was a very big star in that period of wrestling from like the late 80s to the mid 90s and even the early 2000s. From his time in WWF, from his time in WCW, from his time in ECW specifically. And he had a lot of great matches and moments, but I still did not know a lot about the guy, about his final few years, life outside of the ring, even his in-ring career and when he was first brought into WWF and whatnot. I thought it was a really fascinating look at the life and career of Bam Bam Bigelow that I really, again, enjoyed. I hate to use that word because it is a sad piece, as they all are. It's the dark side of the ring for a reason. But it was enlightening, and it was informative, and I enjoyed it for the most part. So, really good stuff here. Bam Bigelow, the Beast from the East. Check out the episode right now on Vice. They have 2 episodes left in the season. Coming up on Tuesday, the Bash at the Beach 2000 episode featuring first-hand perspectives from Vince Russo we had seen as a talking head, obviously, Jeff Jarrett, and not Hulk Hogan. I mean, Hulk Hogan, I don't know if he's ever been on the show. If he was on the show, it might have been the Miss Elizabeth episode back in season 1, and he hasn't done it since. But I'm not even sure if he was on that one. But anyway, no Hogan, but Eric Bischoff is on it. So Bischoff, Russo, and Jarrett, who are all there, among probably others, I would have to imagine. That's next week. And then the last episode is on Marty Jannetty, which should be a wild one. That's the last one, not coming up on Tuesday, but the Tuesday after that, I would think. Thank you guys for checking out my review. I appreciate it. Be sure to like the video, drop a comment, share the video, and subscribe to the channel for more daily content. If you haven't already, check out my on-site report from earlier today, from AEW Collision from last night. That video went up earlier today. Yesterday was my SmackDown Lowdown review, my SmackDown audio review. On Friday was my video interview with Arrow Star and Heel Star Stephen Amell, and my latest WWE Universe Mode video with LA Knight. So a lot of videos to kind of catch up on if you haven't already caught up on the channel content from the weekend. Be sure to hit the bell button if you haven't already to subscribe and be notified every time a new video goes up. Have a great one, folks. I'm Graham G. Matthews, and I'll catch your ass down the road.